6. Jacob and the Angel. It is impossible to recount briefly what I learned from the eccentric musician about Abraxas. The most important thing was that it meant a step forward in the progress to self-knowledge. I was at that time an unusual youth for my 18 years, precocious in 100 ways, immature and helpless in 100 others. When, on occasion, I compared myself with other people, I sometimes felt proud and conceited, but often I was depressed and mortified. I had often regarded myself as a genius, but no less often as half-mad. I could not successfully join in the life and pleasures of my fellows, and I had frequently been consumed with self-reproach and anxiety, as if, separated from them, I was beyond hope, as if I was debarred from life. Pistorius, who himself was a grown-up eccentric, taught me how to maintain my courage and self-respect. By continually finding some value in my words, dreams and fancies, and always taking and discussing them seriously, he set me an example. "You told me that you love music because it has nothing to do with morality," he said. "That's my view too, but you should beware of turning into a moralist. You shouldn't make comparisons between yourself and other people. If nature created you a bat, you must not try and make yourself into an ostrich. You often look upon yourself as a special case. You propose to follow different ways from the majority. That you must unlearn. Look into the fire, gaze into the clouds, and as soon as the presentiments come to you, and the voices within you begin to speak, surrender to them. Do not merely ask whether what you are doing suits your teacher or your father, or this or that good God. That's the way to self-destruction. That would be the pedestrian way, becoming a fossil. Our God, my dear Sinclair, is called Abraxas, and he's both God and devil. He contains in himself the world of light and the world of darkness. Abraxas has nothing to object to in any of your thoughts or any of your dreams. Always remember that. But once you become faultless and normal, he abandons you in favor of a new vessel into which he can pour his thoughts. Among all my dreams, the dark dream of love was the most constant. I was always dreaming that I was entering our old house under the heraldic bird. I advanced to embrace my mother, but she would turn out to be the large, half-male, half-maternal woman who filled me with awe, and for whom I felt the most violent attraction. I could never bring myself to recount this dream to my friend. I withheld it when I had revealed everything else to him. It was my private corner, my secret, my escape. When I was depressed, I asked Pistorius to play me old Buxtehude's Passacaglia. In the dark church in the evening, I was lost in this strange, self-contained music which existed for itself and in its own right. It did me good to hear it, and made me more ready to heed my own inner voice. Sometimes we stayed for a time, sitting in the church after he had finished playing the organ, and watched the daylight shining feebly and losing itself in the high Gothic windows. It seems comic to think that I was once a theological student, and nearly went into the church, said Pistorius. But I was only committing an error in form at that time. It is my aim and vocation to be a priest. I was satisfied too early in life, however, and put myself at Jehovah's disposal before I knew Abraxas. Every religion has its own beauty. Religion is soul. It's all one whether you take part in Christian communion or make a pilgrimage to Mecca. You could have become a pastor then, I said. No, Sinclair, I could not have been true to myself. Our religion is worn out, as if it had ceased to be a religion and had become a purely intellectual matter. I could possibly become a Roman Catholic, but a Protestant priest? Never. The few true believers, I know some, stick closely to the literal interpretation. I cannot say to them that Christ is not a person as far as I am concerned, but a hero, a myth, a vast shadow picture in which humanity sees itself projected on the walls of eternity. And the others who attend church to hear a well-turned sermon, to fulfill a duty so as to leave no stone unturned, and so forth. What would I have to say to them? Convert them, do you think? But I have no desire to do that. The priest does not want to convert. All he wants is to live among believers, among his own brethren, and be an instrument and expression of the feeling out of which man makes his gods. He paused and then continued. Our new belief, for which we choose the name Abraxas, is a good one, my dear friend. It is the best we have, but it is still not yet weaned. It hasn't yet grown its wings. Unfortunately, a solitary religion is still not the true one. It must first be enjoyed in common, must have a cult, its ecstasy, its feast, and its mysteries. He was lost in thought. Can't one also experience mysteries alone or in a very limited circle? I asked hesitantly. One can indeed, he nodded his assent. I've long been doing so. I've practiced cults, for which I should have to spend years in prison if it was known. But I know it is still not yet the right one. Suddenly he clapped me on the shoulder and I shrank back. Young man, he said earnestly, you have your own mysteries. I know you must have dreams which you hide from me. I do not want to know them, but I do say this. Live them, these dreams of yours. Act them out. Erect altars to them. It will still not be the entire solution, but it is a way. Time alone will show whether you and I and a handful of others will renew the world. But we must renew ourselves every day, otherwise it will be hopeless. Think about it. You're 18 years old. You don't chase after women of the streets. You must have dreams and wishes of love. Perhaps they are of the kind that frighten you. Don't be afraid. They are the best you have. Believe me, I've lost a great deal by doing violence to my dreams of love when I was your age. You shouldn't. When you know about Abraxas, you cannot persist in that attitude. One should be fearless and consider nothing forbidden that our soul craves for. Shocked, I interposed. But you can't do everything that comes into your head. You can't do away with a person because he's hostile to you. He stepped closer to me. In certain circumstances, even that. In most cases, however, it is merely an error. Nor do I mean that you should simply do whatever goes through your mind. No. But you should not spoil those ideas, which have their good aspect by rejecting them and moralizing about them. Instead of nailing yourself or someone else to the cross, you can drink from a chalice in solemn mood and reflect on the mystery of sacrifice. Even without all this, it is possible to treat one's actions and so-called temptations with love and respect. Then they will reveal their meaning, and they will have a meaning. If something that seems quite mad or sinful enters your head in the future, should you feel like murdering someone or committing some enormity, remember for a moment that it is Abraxas at work in your imagination. The person you wish to murder is never Mr. So-and-so. He is only a disguise. When we hate someone, we are hating something that is within ourselves, in his image. We are never stirred up by something which does not already exist within us. Pistorius had never said anything which had a deeper effect on me. I could not reply. What had moved me most, and in the strangest way, was the similarity of this exhortation to Demian's words, which I had been carrying around with me for years. They knew nothing of each other, and yet both had given me the same message. The things we see, said Pistorius gently, are the things which are already in us. There is no reality beyond what we have inside us. That is why most people live such unreal lives. They take pictures outside themselves for the real ones, and fail to express their own world. One can of course live contentedly enough in that situation. But once you know about the other, you no longer have the choice of following the majority way. The way of the majority, Sinclair, is easy. Ours is hard. But now we must go. Some days later, after twice waiting for him in vain, he came swaying along around a street corner in the cold night wind. He was reeling along, quite drunk. I felt no wish to call after him. He went past me with shining, bewildered eyes, as if he was answering some dark call from the unknown. I followed him along a street. He moved as if he was being drawn along by an invisible thread. His gait was fantastic, yet somehow free, as if he were a ghost. I returned home gloomily to my unsolved dreams. So that's how the world is renewed, I thought, and felt at the same instant that such a reflection was unworthy and sententious. After all, what did I know about his dreams? Perhaps the path he trod in his drunkenness was surer than the tentative one I trod. Sometimes in the breaks between the lessons, a fellow pupil to whom I had never paid any previous attention seemed anxious to talk to me. He was a small, delicate, puny individual with lank red hair, and he had something odd about his mien and deportment. One evening when I went home, he watched out for me in the lane to allow me to pass by. Then he pursued me and posted himself in front of our door. "Do you want something from me?" I asked. "Only to speak to you," he ventured shyly. "Would you mind walking a few yards with me?" I followed him and sensed that he was very excited and full of expectancy. His hands trembled. "Are you a spiritualist?" he asked quite suddenly. "No, Knauer," I laughed. "Not a bit. What makes you think so?" "But you're a theosophist." "Not that either." Don't be so secretive. I'm quite sure that there's something special about you. I can read it in your eyes. I'm quite convinced that you are in communication with the spirit world. I'm not asking out of curiosity, Sinclair. I'm just a seeker and I'm so alone." "Let's hear about it," I encouraged him. "I know absolutely nothing about spirits. I live in my own dreams. That's what you have felt about me. Others live in dreams but not in their own. That's the difference." "Yes, perhaps that's it," he murmured. "It's just a question of what kind of dreams you live in. Have you ever heard of white magic?" I could not claim to have done so. "It's white magic when you learn to regulate your own life. Then you can become immortal and do magic too. Haven't you ever indulged in experiments of that kind?" At first he was reluctant to answer my inquisitive questions about these practices, until I turned to move away. Then he unburdened himself about the whole thing. "For example, I myself practice that kind of magic when I want to go to sleep or concentrate. I just think of something, a word or a name for instance, or a geometric figure. I think about it as hard as I can and try to think it inside my brain until I feel that it has become part of it. Then I think it into my neck and so on, until the idea has taken complete possession of me. Then I'm, so to speak, sat, and nothing else can rouse me from my peace of mind." I had a vague idea of what he meant, but I realized that he had something else on his mind, for he was curiously excited and restless. I tried to be tactful with my questions, and before long he asked his own. "Are you still continent?" he asked me nervously. "In what sense? Do you mean sexually?" "Yes. I've been continent now for 2 years, since I learned by experience. Before that I was depraved, but you know that. Haven't you ever had a woman then?" "No," I said. "I haven't found the right one." "But if you did find one, you considered the right one, would you go to bed with her?" "Yes, of course. If you yourself had nothing against it," I said with faint irony. Then you're on the wrong road. You can only develop your inner resources if you stay completely continent. That's what I've done now for 2 whole years. 2 years and a little more than a month. It's so difficult. Very often I can't hold out any longer." "Listen to me, Knauer. I don't believe continency is all that important." "I know that's what they all say," he objected, "but I didn't expect that from you. Whoever wants to follow the spiritual path must keep absolutely pure." "All right, do so. But I fail to understand why the person who represses his sexual desires should be considered any purer than anyone else. Or can you exclude the sexual element from every thought and dream?" He gave me a look of despair. "No, indeed no." "Heavens, and yet it seems inevitable. I have dreams at night that I could not even tell myself. Fearful dreams." I recalled what Pistorius had told me, but however much I felt his words to be true, I was unable to pass them on. I found it impossible to proffer him any advice which did not emanate from my own personal experience, unless I felt able to follow it myself. I was silent and felt humiliated that someone should ask advice of me when I had none to give. "I've tried everything," moaned Knauer. "I've done everything that can be done with cold water, snow, exercise, and running. But it's no use. I wake up every night from dreams which I have no right to dream. And the dreadful thing is that I gradually lose grip of the spiritual progress I've already made. I find it almost impossible to concentrate or lull myself to sleep again. I often lie awake the whole night. I can never hold out long. When I finally have to give up the struggle, yield and make myself impure again, I am more despicable than all the others who have never had to fight. Can you understand that?" I nodded, but did not know what to say. He was beginning to bore me, and I was afraid of myself, because I could not feel very deeply impressed by his despair. All I felt was, I can't help you. Then you can't tell me anything to help? He said finally, sad and exhausted. Absolutely nothing? But there must be a way. How do you manage? I can't say, Knauer. We can't help anybody else. No one was able to help me. You must rely on yourself and then do what comes to you from within. There's no other way. If you can't find the way to yourself, you won't find any spirits either, I'm sure. Disappointed and suddenly bereft of speech, the little chap looked at me. Then a sudden gleam of hatred entered his eye, and he grimaced and shrieked. You're a fine saint. You've got your secret vice too. You play the wise man, and secretly you cling to the same dirt as I do, and everybody else. You're a swine like me. We're all of us swine. I went off and left him standing there. He took 2 or 3 steps after me, hesitated, turned round and ran off. I felt ill, with mixed feelings of disgust and sympathy, and I was unable to rid myself of this nausea until I had arranged my few pictures round me in my little room and given myself up to my private dreams with intense fervour. Then my dream returned at once. Our gateway and the coat of arms, my mother and the strange woman whose features I saw with such a preternatural clarity that I was able to draw her portrait from memory the same evening. When this drawing was completed a few days later, and had been painted in, almost unconsciously, during the odd 10 minutes in between times, I hung it on my wall the same evening, pushed the study lamp in front of it, and stood before it as before a spirit with whom I had to fight it out. The face was similar to the previous one, similar to my friend Demian, and in some way resembled me. One eye was perceptibly higher than the other, and her glance looked over and beyond me with a fateful stare. I stood before her, and the nervous strain made my blood run cold. I questioned the picture, accused it, caressed it, prayed to it, called it mother, sweetheart, whore and strumpet. I called it Abraxas. Meantime, sayings of Pistorius, or were they Demian's, came into my head. I couldn't recall when they had been uttered, but I imagined I could hear them again. They were remarks about Jacob wrestling with the angel of God, and his, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. The painted face in the lamplight changed at every utterance I made. Light and shining, dark and sinister. Livid lids closed over glazed eyes, which opened again, and darted loving glances. It was woman, man, girl, small child, animal. Then it melted away to a small speck, grew large and clear again. At length I yielded to the strong impulse to shut my eyes, and I saw the image within myself, more vivid and powerful than ever. I wanted to prostrate myself before it, but it was so much part of me that I was unable to leave it, as if it had just turned into me myself. Then I heard a dark, thunderous roar, as though from a spring storm, and I trembled in an indescribably novel feeling of fear and misadventure. Stars flashed before my eyes and were extinguished. Memories which went back to forgotten infancy, nay, pre-existence, and the first stages of being, hurried past me. But the memories which seemed to rehearse my whole life in its deepest intimacy did not stop with the past and present. They went further, mirrored the future, tore me away from the present into new forms of life, whose images were fantastically clear and dazzling, though I was unable to recapture a single one later. In the night I awoke out of my profound sleep. I was still dressed and lay diagonally across the bed. I switched on the light, felt I must remember something important, but could recall nothing of the hours that had passed. I lit the lamp. The memory gradually returned. I looked for the picture. It no longer hung on the wall. It was not on the table either. Then I had a vague feeling that I had burned it. Or had I merely dreamed that I had burnt it in my hands and eaten the ashes? A great restlessness seized hold of me. I put on my hat, strode out through the house and along the lane as if I were being driven by some outward force, ran on and on through streets and across squares as though blown by gusts of wind. Listened by the dark church of my friend, blindly seeking for something without knowing what it was. I passed through a suburb where there were brothels that had a light here and there in the windows. Further out still stood some new buildings and piles of bricks, partially covered with grey-coloured snow. As I wandered like a somnambulist, under the influence of this strange impulse, I noticed a new building of my hometown. It was there that my tormentor Cromer had taken me for our first financial settlement. A similar building lay before me in the grey night, yawned at me with its gaping door. It drew me in. I had no choice, and I advanced, stumbling over heaps of sand and rubbish. The urge was irresistible. I had to enter. I staggered into the dreary room over planks and broken bricks. It smelled depressingly of damp coal and stones. There was a heap of sand, a light stain of grey. All the rest was dark. Then a voice cried out in terror. "For God's sake, Sinclair, where have you come from?" And a figure rose out of the darkness, a small, lean fellow like a ghost. My hair stood on end. I recognized my schoolmate Knauer. "How do you come to be here?" he asked, almost mad with emotion. "How did you manage to find me?" I didn't understand what he meant. "I wasn't searching for you," I said, dazed, and every word I said cost me an effort and was forced wearily through my heavy, as it were frozen lips. He stared at me. "Not searching?" "No, I felt drawn here." "Did you call me?" "You must have called me." "What are you doing here then? It's night." He clasped me tightly in his thin arms. "Yes, night. It will soon be morning. Ah, Sinclair, how wonderful that you haven't forgotten me. Can you forgive me then?" "What for?" "Ah, dear, I was so odious." Only at this point did I recall our conversation. Had it occurred 4 or 5 days ago? It seemed a lifetime since then, but now suddenly it all became clear. Not only what had happened between us, but why I had come hither, and what Knauer had wanted to do out there. "You intended to take your life then, Knauer?" He shivered with cold and fear. "Yes, I intended to. I don't know whether I could have done. I intended to wait until it was morning." I drew him out into the open air. The first horizontal streaks of dawn glimmered unbelievably cold and joyless in the grey air. I led the boy for a while by the arm. I heard myself say, "Now go home and don't say a word to anyone. You've been treading the wrong path, the false path. We're not the swine you spoke of. We're human beings. We make gods and do battle with them, and they bless us." We walked on in silence and parted company. When I reached home, it was daylight. The best things I gained from my remaining days in Saint were the hours I spent listening to Pistorius at the organ or in front of the fire. We were studying a Greek text together about Abraxas, and he read out extracts from a translation from the Vedas, and told me how to speak the sacred Om. But it was not these bits of occult learning that provided my inner sustenance. Rather the contrary. What encouraged me was the progress within myself, my increasing faith in my own dreams, thoughts and presentiments, and my increasing knowledge of the power I possessed within me. I had a complete understanding with Pistorius. I only needed to think hard of him and could be sure that he, or a message from him, would come. I could ask him anything, as I would Demian, without his having to be present in person. All I had to do was to imagine him there and frame my questions in the form of intensive thoughts. Then all the spiritual effort that I expended in the question came back to me with life force. Only, it was not the person of Pistorius, nor that of Demian that I conjured up, but the painted picture, the half-male, half-female fantasy of my demon which I had to evoke. This being was now no longer confined to my dreams, no longer merely depicted on paper. It was in me, like a wish-fulfillment and enhanced version of myself. The relationship which the would-be suicide Knauer had now established with me was peculiar, sometimes laughable. Ever since the night during which I had been sent to him, he clung to me like a faithful servant or dog, made every effort to link his life with mine, and followed me around blindly. He came to me with the most astonishing questions and requests, wanted to see spirits, learn the Kabbalah, and refused to believe me when I assured him that I did not understand all these mysteries. He thought nothing was beyond my powers. But the strange thing was that he often approached me with his wonderful and stupid questions, just at a moment when I was faced with some problem to which his moody ideas or requests often provided the clue and set me on the road towards a solution. He was often a bore, and I would dismiss him peremptorily, but I still had the feeling that he too was sent to me, that from him too came back whatever I gave him. In double measure, he too was a leader for me, or at any rate represented a way to follow. The mad books and writings which he brought to me, and in which he sought his salvation, taught me more than I could comprehend at the time. Later on, Knauer slipped unnoticed out of my life. A formal parting was not necessary. It was just the opposite with Pistorius. Towards the conclusion of my school days in St., I still had a strange experience to share with him. Even the most harmless of human beings cannot altogether escape coming into conflict with the praiseworthy virtues of piety and gratitude on one or two occasions in their lives. Sooner or later, everyone must take the step that separates him from his father and teachers. Everyone must experience something of the hardness of solitude, even if most human beings cannot take much of it and soon crawl back. I myself did not make a sudden or violent break from my parents and their world, my childhood, world of light. But I slowly, almost imperceptibly, drew further and further away from them. I was sorry and suffered many galling hours during my visits home, but I was not fundamentally affected. It was bearable. But where we have given of our love and respect not from habit, but of our own free will, where we have been children and friends from our inmost heart, it is a bitter and terrible moment when we suddenly recognize that our natural tendency is bound to lead us away from the people we love. Then every thought which alienates the friend and teacher turns back into our own heart with poisoned barbs. Then every defensive blow comes back at one's own face, and the words infidelity and ingratitude surge up like shameful cries and branding irons in the mind of the person who has preciously prided himself on his sound moral behavior, and the frightened heart flees timidly back to the charmed valleys of childish virtues, unable to believe that this break too must be made, this bond also be severed. As time went on, my unquestioning acknowledgement of my friend Pistorius as a leader had been modified. My friendship with him, his counsel, his proximity, the comfort he had brought, had been the most vital experiences of those months of my adolescence. God had spoken to me through him. From his lips, my dreams had been returned to me, explained and interpreted. He had restored my faith in myself. And now, alas, I was becoming conscious of a gradually increasing opposition to him within me. I found too much didacticism in his words. I felt that he only fully understood one part of me. No quarrel or scene occurred between us, no break, not even an agreement to differ. I merely uttered one single harmless phrase, but it was in that precise moment that an illusion was shattered and fell between us like so many coloured fragments. A vague presentiment of such a happening had already depressed me for some time, and it took a definite shape one Sunday in his old study. We were lying on the floor by the fire, and he was talking about the mysteries and forms of religion which he was studying and turning over in his mind, and the future potentialities of which preoccupied him. All this seemed to me more an object of curiosity and interest than a really vital matter. It had a pedagogic ring about it. It sounded like tedious research among the fragments of ancient worlds. And all at once I felt a repugnance against the whole business, this cult of mythologies, this mosaic game he was playing with fragments of traditional religious beliefs. Pistorius, I said suddenly in a fit of malice, which both surprised and frightened me, you ought to tell me a dream, a real dream, one that you've dreamed during the night. What you are telling me is all so damned antiquarian. He'd never heard me speak like that before, and I immediately realized with a mixture of shame and horror that the arrow which I had fired at him, and with which I had pierced his heart, had come from his own armory, and that I was now returning to him with sharpened barbs the self-reproaches which I had sometimes heard him utter in his ironical way. He reacted instantaneously and fell silent at once. I glanced at him with dread in my heart, and saw that he had gone terribly pale. After a long uneasy pause, he threw some fresh logs on the fire and said in a quiet voice, "You're quite right, St. Clair. You're a clever fellow, and I will spare you the antiquarian stuff." Although he spoke calmly, he was obviously hurt. What had I done? I was very near tears. I wanted to speak a message of encouragement, implore his forgiveness, assure him of my affection, my deep gratitude. Words of comfort rose to my lips, but I could not utter them. I continued to lie there, gazing into the fire, and kept silent. He kept silent too, and so we lay, and the fire dwindled, and with every dying flame I felt something beautiful and profound that could never return, glow, and disappear. "I'm afraid you misunderstand me," I said at length, dejectedly in a dry, hoarse voice. These stupid and senseless words fell mechanically from my lips, as if I was reading from a magazine serial. "I understand you perfectly well," said Pistorius gently. "You are right." He paused. Then he continued slowly. "That is, as far as one man can be right against anyone else." A voice inside me said, "No, I'm wrong." But I could not say it aloud. I knew that with my brief words I had put my finger on his fundamental weakness, his affliction and wound. I had probed the place where he was unsure of himself. His ideal was antiquarian. He was a seeker in the past, a romantic. And suddenly I realized very forcibly that what Pistorius had been and had given to me was precisely what he could never be and give to himself. He had shown me a way which even he, the leader, must bypass and abandon. God knows how the words had sprung to my lips. I had not intended them in any derogatory sense. I had not anticipated their disastrous effect. I had said something of whose significance I myself was not aware at the moment of speaking. I had yielded to a vague, somewhat petty and mischievous impulse, and it had been charged with fate. I had committed a trivial and heedless gaucherie, which he regarded as a judgment on him. How much I wished at that time that he would fly into a temper, defend himself and storm about me. But he did nothing of the kind. I had to do all that for him inside myself. He would have forced a smile if he could have managed it. The fact that he found it impossible was the surest proof of the extent of the injury I had done him. Meantime, by accepting this blow so quietly from an impudent and ungrateful pupil, by remaining silent and taking the rebuff, by acknowledging what I had said as his fate, he made me odious in my own eyes, and my indiscretion 100 times worse. When I had hit out, I thought I was aiming my blow at a tough, well-armed man, but now it turned out to be a quiet, suffering, defenseless creature who was surrendering without a protest. We stayed for a long time in front of the glimmering fire, and every flowing shape, every writhing twig evoked the rich and pleasurable hours of the past, and brought home more and more my indebtedness to Pistorius. Finally, I could bear it no longer. I rose to my feet and went. For long enough I stood at his door, for long enough I stood on the dark stairs, for long enough outside, waiting by the door in case he should follow me. Then I continued my way and tramped along for hours and hours through the town and suburbs, park and woods, until evening. Then for the first time, I was conscious of the mark of Cain on my forehead. It was only gradually that I became aware of this. My thoughts were all aimed in one direction, accusing myself and defending Pistorius. Yet it ended the other way round, for although I was prepared to regret and take back my hasty word, I felt that what I had said was true. Now for the first time I understood Pistorius, and was able to reconstruct in my mind the whole dream that he had set himself to fulfill. He had wanted to be a priest, to announce the new religion, provide new forms for the movement, serve it with love and devotion, and create a series of new symbols. But it was beyond his power to do so. This could never be his function. He lingered too much in the past. His knowledge of ancient days was too precise. He knew far too much about Egypt, India, Mithras, and Abraxas. His love was bound up with symbols that the world had already seen, and in his heart of hearts he realized that the new must be really new, and different, and must spring up from new soil, and not be created from museums and libraries. Perhaps his function was to help to lead men to themselves, as he had done in my case, not to provide them with the yet unspoken message and their new gods. And at this point I felt the truth burning within me like a sharp flame, that there was some role for everybody, but it was not one which he himself could choose, recast and regulate to his own liking. One had no right to want new gods, no right at all to want to give the world anything of that sort. There was but one duty for a grown man. It was to seek the way to himself, to become resolute within, to grope his way forward wherever that might lead him. The discovery shook me profoundly. It was the fruit of this experience. I had often toyed with pictures of the future, dreamed of roles which might be assigned to me, as a poet maybe, or prophet or painter or kindred vocation. All that was futile. I was not there to write poetry, to preach or paint. Neither I nor any other man was there for that purpose. They were only incidental things. There was only one true vocation for everybody, to find the way to himself. He might end as poet, lunatic, prophet, or criminal. That was not his affair. Ultimately, it was of no account. His affair was to discover his own destiny, not something of his own choosing, and live it out wholly and resolutely within himself. Anything else was merely a half-life, an attempt at evasion, an escape into the ideals of the masses, complacency, and fear of his inner soul. The new picture rose before me, sacred and awe-inspiring, 100 times glimpsed, possibly often expressed and now experienced for the first time. I was an experiment on the part of nature, a throw into the unknown, perhaps for some new purpose, perhaps for nothing, and my only vocation was to allow this throw to work itself out in my innermost being, feel its will within me, and make it wholly mine. That, or nothing. I had already tasted much loneliness. Now I felt that there was a deeper loneliness, a loneliness that was inescapable. I made no attempt at a reconciliation with Pistorius. We remained friends, but the relationship had changed. On one occasion only did we refer to the conversation. He said, "You know that I wish to become a priest. Above all, I wanted to be the priest of the new religion, of which you and I have so many presentiments. That role can never be mine. I know it, and I've known it for a long time without wholly admitting it to myself. I now intend to undertake another kind of priestly service, perhaps on the organ, perhaps some other way. But I must always have things around me that I find beautiful and sacred. Organ music and mystery, symbol and myth. I need those and cannot renounce them. That is my weakness. For often enough, St. Clair, I know that I ought not to have desires of this kind, that they are luxury and weakness. It would be larger-minded and juster if I put myself quite unreservedly at the disposal of fate. But that I cannot do. It is the only thing I cannot do. But perhaps you can. It is difficult. It is the only really difficult thing there is. I have often dreamed of doing so. But I cannot. I am afraid. I am not capable of standing so naked and alone. I am a poor weak dog who needs warmth and food, and likes the comfort of having his fellow creatures near him. The man who really wants nothing beyond his destiny no longer has his neighbours beside him. He stands quite alone and has nothing but the cold world around him. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. There have been martyrs who let themselves be nailed to the cross without a murmur, but even these were not heroes, were not freed, for even they wanted something that was homely and familiar to them. They had models, they had ideals. But the man who follows his destiny is allowed neither models nor ideals, nothing cherished or comforting. And yet, this is the path one must follow. People like you and me are truly lonely, but we still have each other. We have the secret satisfaction of being different, of putting up resistance, of desiring the unusual. But one must cast aside that too if one wishes to go the whole way. One may not be revolutionary, an example or a martyr either. It is beyond imagining. Yes, it was beyond imagining, but it could be dreamed of, anticipated, felt. Sometimes I had a slight experience of it when I found a whole quiet hour to myself. At such times I would look into myself and see the image of my destiny in the staring eyes. They could be full of wisdom, full of madness. They could glow with love or dire evil. It was all the same. You could not choose. You ought not to want anything. Only yourself, your own fate. Pistorius has served me as a guide on part of my journey. In those days I ran around like a blind man. Storms raged inside me. Every step was danger. I saw nothing in front of me except the abysmal darkness into which all former paths ended and vanished. And within myself I saw the image of the leader who resembled Demian, and in whose eyes my fate could be read. I wrote on a piece of paper, "A leader has abandoned me. I am standing in utter darkness. I cannot take another step alone. Help me." I wanted to send a message to Demian, yet I forbore. Each time the impulse came, it seemed so feeble and senseless. But I knew my little prayer by heart, and often uttered it silently. It accompanied me every hour. I began to have some inkling of what prayer meant. My school days were over. I was to make a holiday tour which my father had planned. Then I was to proceed to the university, but I did not know what subject I was expected to read. I was allowed to do philosophy for a term. Any other subject would have done as well.